Hi guys, welcome to today's maths lesson. So our focus is going to be finance and growth. In particular, we're going to look at what it means to have growth. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you a few questions that I want you to please think about, so that when we're talking about this concept of simple growth in particular, then you have things that you are busy thinking of as we're busy with this lesson. So let's just jump right into it. So firstly, I will ask you, have you ever thought about how you would describe what growth is? So that's something just to pause and think about there. And also, what exactly is growth? Now, if you look at this here, you can see that we are looking at a pot, right? And this is a plant pot. So initially, this is what I have as my plant there. And then over time, my plant goes to that point. And over time, my plant goes to that point. So you can see that there is a change in terms of the plant that I have here. And that's one example of what growth would mean in this context. Also, how would you then describe growth in words? So when you're talking about describing growth in words, can you then say what change exactly is it that you are trying to look at? Is your change constant or is your change random? And exactly in how long or in what intervals is the change happening? So that's what you would need to talk about if you want to describe your growth in words. Now, let's also look at this particular tree here, right? So if I look at this, over time, you can see that these circles of ours here, they are growing gradually so. And as they are growing, normally it grows through years. So this is a yearly growth. So in this instance, we then call this the rate of change, right? Rate of change meaning it's change with respect to years, because a tree would grow each and every year. So every year it becomes a bit bigger, a bit bigger, a bit bigger. Hence, we always just cut it now and again. So this is one also example of what growth would actually mean. Now, let's now pin this down to what exactly we want to try and talk about, describing growth using mathematics. I want you guys to now look at this particular graph that we have here. It shows the weight of different babies for 30 months. So as you can see on this particular graph that I have here, on the x-axis here, I have the age in months, and on the y-axis, I have the weight in kgs. And over time, you can see that the person will start having maybe a weight between 2 and 4 kgs. One thing you need to know here is we cannot start the weight at 0 there, because we can't say a person started having weight as 0 kgs. That is a baby for that matter. So they start there and gradually it grows over the 30-month period. And then the other baby can start maybe having a growth of 4 kgs, which will grow gradually until it gets to roughly there maybe 15 kgs when they are 30 months old. And now what I want you to look at is when you're talking about growth, you need to look at whether there is a pattern, and also can we develop a model to predict the growth. So when you're talking about a pattern, from this initial point to the second point, to the third point, to the fourth point, is there a constant pattern that we can look at? Is there maybe an exponential pattern that we can look at? Or is there just a random pattern that we can look at? And if there is a pattern, can I then develop a model such that if I was to be given maybe 100th term, I can find out what exactly that term is going to be based on this model that I've created at that time. So that's what we are actually talking about here. Is there a pattern? Number one. Two, can I develop a model to predict something that might happen in future? Now, To pin this down, we're going to use a concept map. Our big idea is growth. And under growth, we're going to look at what patterns that the growth follows. And we're also going to look at growth in terms of graphs, as I've shown you with the previous example. And we are also going to look at equations. Equations would then be the model that I just explained now, whether we can develop a model to explain the growth that we want or to predict this growth that we are talking about. And then we're going to also pin this growth in terms of context. One will be society, and then it will be finance. So finance will be the main big idea that we are trying to get to. But before that, we are going to look at this under society as our context. Now, let's first look at the first concept, which is patterns. Now, under patterns, I have either simple, compound, or random patterns. Now, our simple pattern would be where there is a constant growth that is happening with my pattern as I am moving from one term to the next. And with my compound growth or my compound pattern would mean it is a constant, but not necessarily that I am adding it. It would be I'm multiplying by the same value going forward. And then there will be a random pattern where it does not follow a specific pattern, but you can see when you're looking at the pattern that there is some form of pattern there. Now, with data, it's either going to be equations and graphs. So we're going to use patterns to talk about equations, number one, and then also to pin this down to our graphs. Now, specifically, let's look at simple growth. Now, there are keywords that I'm going to be giving you guys that you need to look at, please, under simple growth. These would be words that explain what it means to have simple growth, and also what is it that we need to do to try and predict what would happen in the future, being given that this is a simple growth. Now, you need to measure the change that is constant. So if it's a simple growth, we measure change that is constant. And also, this is linked to an arithmetic pattern, which I know that we might be familiar with an arithmetic pattern where we deal with a D, which means there's a common difference as we are moving from one term to the next. Still on our keywords, we also have a rate of change. A rate of change will be change over a certain period of time, maybe yearly, monthly, 2 years, or every 6 months, or every 3 months. That's the change that we are talking about, which is then the rate of change. And then with this, we look at the steepness of a slope. So the rate of change is measured as the gradient. Remember, our gradient will be normally the change in our rise over the change in our run, meaning the change in the y values divided by the change in the x-axis. And that steepness of that slope will then tell us what the rate of change is over time of this particular growth that we are talking about. All right, so guys, that's all that I wanted to just discuss with you for now. I want you to look at, or to think about rather, what exactly does it mean to have growth, specifically simple growth, and what exactly does it mean to have a pattern under growth? Is our pattern simple, compound, or is it just a random pattern? Is there a rate of change that we are dealing with? And also look at graphs, or think about graphs that we'll be dealing with to try and represent the issue of growth and how growth would work in this concept. So one example would be an arithmetic pattern, as you saw, which I will just show you a quick example of what an arithmetic pattern would be, so that you can now think about this as you are thinking about finance and growth, specifically under simple growth. So let's say, for example, with our arithmetic pattern, which I know that most of us are familiar with, it will be, let's say I have 3, and then I have 5 there, I have 7, I have 9. So I will be looking at how does each term grow to go to the next term. And I will be looking at what the difference is between these two terms. So you can see that our difference there is 2, and our difference there is 2, and our difference there is 2. What does that mean? It means, firstly, we started with 3, and then we added 2 to the 3 to get the 5, so it grew with 2. And then we added another 2, meaning it grew by 2 as well. And lastly, we added another 2, which means it grew by 2 as well. So that's the concept of growth that we are trying to emphasize here. All right, so that's it from me, guys. We're just going to go to a quick ad break, and I'll be back with some more. Stay tuned.